Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to be talking all about how to write romance. This video is relevant for anyone writing any type of romance. So without further ado, let's just get into the video. My first tip for you, number one, is that shitty characters equals a shitty romance. I want you to very quickly think back to the last romance book that you read and you hated. I am willing to bet your number one complaint about this book had something to do with the characters. So whether that was that they were unlikable, they were unbelievable, or maybe worse, even the chemistry between the characters was really bad or even toxic. This really highlights how important characters are to romance books. Romances are, by and large, character-driven stories because romances are between two characters. So naturally, almost every romance book that you read is going to be character-driven. And because of that, character creation is super important. And while I would argue that character creation is important in most, if not all books, it's especially important in character-driven genres like romance. Making sure that your characters are believable and likable, so make sure that they have an equal amount of good traits versus bad traits. One of my biggest tips for characters, especially again in multi-genre romance, is making sure that the love interest plays a bigger role in the plot as a whole. You want to find a way to make sure that the love interest is incorporated into the plot as a whole, because that is going to be the key to making sure that your love interest doesn't feel like they're made just for the main character, which is a mistake that a lot of romance authors make. I found a big criticism that I have a lot in fantasy romance in particular is that the love interest a lot of the time will feel like their only purpose in life is to be the love interest to the main character, because we don't ever get any mentions of them doing anything else outside of the main character, and a lot of the time this is because they're not involved in the plot itself. And obviously when the characters are involved in the main plot of your novel, that's going to allow for a lot more scenes between them. So then my second tip for you is to make sure that you keep things balanced with your character creation. What does this mean? The easiest way to look at this is between the traits of both of your characters. So for example, let's say for a character that you're making, they are an insecure character, but they are very smart and their love interest is very confident and they're very kind. Maybe the confident character helps the insecure character to become more confident, and in turn, the insecure character, because they're very smart, is able to help the confident character pass an exam. That's sort of how you want to work things. You want to make sure that your characters have good chemistry, and the way that you do this 9 times out of 10 is making sure that their traits complement each other. And I think that where a lot of writers fuck up on this is they focus on the positive traits and they don't necessarily consider the negative traits. And I would argue that looking at the negative traits is probably even more important than the positive traits, because it's really easy for two positive things to complement each other, but that's a lot harder with flaws. And 9 times out of 10, when romances suck, sometimes it's because there's too many flaws or because the flaws of the characters aren't compatible with each other. But let's get into tip number 3, which is writing pretty much anything romantic, because we are writing romance. And I think that this is something that a lot of people can struggle with, because a lot of the times, especially if you've been in a relationship for a while, you might not always consider what you find romantic. It's kind of like one of those questions where it seems so easy, but you genuinely have no idea how to answer it. If you're struggling to come up with some swoon-worthy romantic moments, I would advise is for you to take a second and think in your personal experiences with dating, or even just when you're reading fiction, what really makes you think, oh my god, this is so cute, this is so romantic, I love it. For me personally, my love language is words of affirmation, and I absolutely adore the long-winded, dramatic proclamations of love. I know they're not for everybody, but I am that bitch who will literally sit there and read like 10 pages of it. I do not give a shit. Oh my god, I cannot tell you how much I adore words of affirmation. It just, and the dramatic proclamations of love, it really gets me going, and that is one of my favorite things to write about in fiction, and it's one of my favorite things to read about. Something that could help is literally just make a list of what you consider to be romantic, and that can be a really great starting point in making scenes with your characters for the romance. My next tip for you is number 4, which is to think about the romance tropes that you enjoy reading. So if you're writing romance, I'm going to assume that you enjoy writing romance and thus you enjoy reading romance. So think about some of your favorite romance books and what tropes they include. A common kind of format of tropes that I kind of call progression of the relationship. So this is things like friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, second chance romance, that sort of thing. And then we also have other romantic tropes like forbidden romance. Play around with the different tropes that you enjoy seeing and see if you can incorporate that into your writing. And honestly, for me personally, just thinking about tropes alone helps me generate so many story ideas. Next tip for you is number 5, and that is to research the structure of romance books. In my opinion, every genre has a slightly altered structure from the typical book. While I feel like you can follow any sort of book structure for multiple genres, I feel like every genre has a specific kind of structure that you can expect from it. And because of this, readers are going to have certain expectations of what they are going to see in a romance. So it behooves you to research structure in general. So if you know nothing about writing structure, do that research now. When you have a firm understanding of writing structure, research structure as it relates to romance books, and of course read some romance books and see how other authors do it, because reading alone can help you see how the structure works. Because while I would guess that most romance readers couldn't give you a beat-by-beat explanation of romance structure, he could probably give you a summarized version of it. Writing structure is kind of like the building blocks of your story, so most readers, even if they're not writers themselves, can recognize romance structure, which is why it's important to research romance structure. And if you're writing a romance book or a multi-genre romance book, research it as it applies to your genre. This next tip isn't about writing per se, but I just had to include it because, oh my god, that is number 6, which is that if you are going to market your book as a romance, make sure it's actually a romance. I realize this is common sense, but some of y'all don't have that, okay? So first of all, one of the major qualifiers for a book to be a romance is either a happily ever after or a happy for now. That means that if the characters die at the end, that's not a romance. Romeo and Juliet, it's not a romance. And in general, just like how it's important to research writing structure, it's important to research genres and subgenres and what the qualifiers are for the different genres and subgenres that you might be writing in. We're at 7. Is this 7? No. Should I do it like that? Yeah. Okay. Next we have number 7, which is to break up the romance. Not literally. This mostly applies to contemporary romance stories, but this can honestly be applied to any romance in any genre. Because here's the thing about romance. Romance fans, we love romance, okay? But if every single part of the book is solely about the romance, there's nothing else to break the romance up. You could have written the best romance in the world, and readers are probably going to get sick of it, because when you see the same content over and over and over again, it gets boring. I can't stop looking at my lipstick and how cute this looks. Really just feeling myself today. The most common way to break up a romance is going to be through the use of subplots. I know what you're thinking. Ren, I thought subplots were just for romance. Well, apparently, against what people think, there can be subplots about pretty much anything. Most commonly, subplots are going to revolve around relationships of some kind. So sometimes this might be a relationship between a family as a whole, or maybe members of a family. And if you don't want to use a subplot as a whole, you can always just use some sort of correlated thing that is occurring in the character's life. So the most common example of this that I could think of is like if your character is in high school or in university, you could use their classes or them doing homework or taking an exam or what the fuck ever to break up the romance a little bit. Next tip for you is kind of along the same lines, which is number 8, which is to space out all of the firsts. Probably the 3 I would say most dominant for us is going to be the first kiss, the first time your characters screw, if they screw in your book, and then the first time that they say I love you. I feel like are the 3 big firsts, and if you have them all right in a row, not spaced apart, readers are probably going to be annoyed, because here's the thing, readers love firsts. That's why meet cutes are so important in a book, because first impressions matter. And typically the first time that someone says something is when there's going to be a shit ton of showing, and that's when you're really going to focus on it, because this has never happened before. Honey? Oh, do you have anything to say? Do you have anything to say? No, look at you. You're so cute. Oh, you're so cute. Hey, no going in the windowsill, honey. I'm filling right here. No. When planning out your romance, to make sure that everything is spaced out, I would just think about, first of all, how long this romance is going to span over. So if you're writing a contemporary romance, it's probably going to be a standalone. So you might want to space out these first in different sections of your book. So for example, maybe in the first 20% of the book, the first kiss happens. Maybe in the first 50%, they say I love you. And maybe at the 75% mark, they screw. Something like that. Just try and space them out so that there's lots of times for readers to build the anticipation towards these moments, which is my other point with this, which is to include the almost moments. So these are things like the almost kisses, if your characters are cock blocked, that sort of thing. These almost moments can be infuriating in both a good way and in a bad way. So let's touch on how to do it in a good way. So almost moments should be infuriating in a good way because we really want these characters to get closer. We want them to kiss. We want them to say I love you. However, a lot of the times it's not rewarding if we don't have to wait for or if we don't have to work to get the things that we want, like these characters kissing for the first time or saying I love you. Which is why there are typically a couple almost kisses or almost I love yous, that sort of thing. However, you want to be careful with this because a lot of times writers will go overboard and have like 10 almost kisses in a book. That is way too many. Personally, I strive for 1 to 2, maybe 3, depending on the romance. Personally, I would include at least 1 in the book, but again, it is totally up to you and it does vary on your story. And then my next tip for you is number 9, and I am going to call myself out when I say to make sure that your date scenes have variety. I am calling myself out because something that used to happen in my first drafts all the time is I would have the same date location over and over again. They always went to dinner. They always went to the movies. They always talked because I love writing dialogue. And then I realized that those were really fucking boring to read and honestly to write too because I was writing the same thing over and over again. It's really important to show variety in your romance, because like we've already covered, readers are going to get bored if they're reading the same shit over and over again, and you'll probably get bored writing it as well. And also, it's just not realistic. Because in the real world, people get tired of doing the same thing over and over and over again as well. 90% of the time, it's going to be different. So maybe in one scene, the characters go to dinner in a movie. Then maybe in one scene, they go to a museum. Then maybe one time they go to a park. This is a great chance for you to get creative with it and think about what's important to your characters. What could make for a really memorable date scene?